Whispers in the Dark, the Mick Mack Mysteries. It's Halloween in Toronto, 1950. The Royal Ontario Museum stands quiet under a restless October sky. Its marble halls locked, its exhibits asleep. But inside, a night watchman swears he's hearing whispers that shouldn't be there. Voices that call his name. When detectives Mick McCathie and MacNeely arrive, they'll find themselves caught in a mystery that blurs a line between history and haunting. A story of superstition, science, and a manuscript said to hold a curse. This is Whispers in the Dark. Chapter 1. The Night Watchman's Whispers. It was well past midnight at the Royal Ontario Museum, and the building had that hollow stillness only old places know, a silence so deep it seemed to breathe. Frankie Fingers D'Angelo tugged his cap a little lower and wished, not for the first time, that he'd brought another cup of coffee. The marble floors gleamed under his flashlight, each step echoing too loudly for comfort. The Egyptian gallery loomed ahead, all shadows and statues that never blinked. He told himself he wasn't nervous, just cautious of hieroglyphs that seemed to watch him back, cautious of the whispers that had started earlier in the week. Tonight, though, the whispers sounded closer. He froze. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice seemed to breathe his name, soft, drawn out, almost playful. Frankie. He spun, light cutting through the gloom. Nothing. Only a row of glass cases filled with ancient masks, their empty eyes catching the beam. He swallowed hard and said to nobody in particular, "If that's you, Slim, it ain't funny." A door creaked behind him. Sam, Slim Kowalski, stepped into view, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression that could sour milk. "Fingers," Slim said, "I told you to stop talking to yourself. The security room's picking up your voice on the intercom again. You're giving the cleaning crew heart attacks." Frankie lowered the flashlight. "I heard something, a whisper, right down here. Said my name clear as day." Slim rolled his eyes. "It's Pipes, Fingers. Pipes don't whisper your name." Frankie frowned. "These ones do." Slim sighed. "You want ghosts? Go work at Casa Loma. Here it's just leaky plumbing and overactive imagination." But before Slim could finish the lecture, a noise rolled through the hall. A long, low murmur like wind moving through stone. Both men stopped. Slim tried to recover first. "Probably a draft," he said, "from the loading dock." Frankie whispered, "Then how come it came from upstairs?" Light flickered somewhere above them, the mezzanine balcony where the medieval exhibit sat in shadows. Slim's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he said, "and no more ghost stories." He headed toward the stairs, each step echoing too long in the empty museum. Frankie followed, flashlight trembling just slightly. Halfway up, Slim stopped. A faint tapping sound, 3 sharp knocks, drifted from the far end of the hall. They turned. In the gloom stood a figure, tall, still, almost human, its face pale and unmoving. Frankie dropped his flashlight. "Slim," he whispered, "tell me that's one of the wax dummies?" Slim squinted. "It better be." The lights flickered once more, and when they steadied, the figure was gone. That's when Slim decided maybe it was time to call for backup. An hour later, the main doors of the museum swung open. 2 detectives stepped in, coats turned up, fedoras damp from the October drizzle. Detective Mick McCathie, all quiet curiosity, looked around the grand foyer as though the walls might be holding secrets. Beside him, Archie MacNeely pulled out a notebook and said what they were both thinking. "So ghosts now. Guess we're branching out." Mick smiled faintly. "Let's start with something simpler, like why a night watchman thinks a museum is whispering to him." As the heavy doors closed behind them, The last echo of the whisper drifted through the hall once more, low, distant, and just clear enough to raise the hair on the back of your neck. Frankie. Chapter 2. The Professor's Prophecy. Morning never quite reached the interior of the Royal Ontario Museum. Even in daylight, the place kept its secrets behind drawn curtains and half-lit corridors. By the time Mick and Mack arrived at the manuscript room, the air already felt heavy, like history itself was watching. Professor Arpad Korda waited for them at the far end of the chamber. Tall, immaculate, and carved in the same shadows of portraits that lined the wall. His eyes had that peculiar gleam that comes from too much study, not enough sleep. On the long oak table before him lay the object of the night's disturbance, a bound manuscript the color of old blood. The leather was cracked but faintly luminous, the lettering on its spine indecipherable. Korda greeted the detectives with the formal politeness of a man unused to interruption. He explained that the manuscript had arrived from Budapest weeks earlier, part of a private collection tracing medieval rituals and superstitions. He spoke softly, his accent curling through the words like smoke. According to Korda, the text was written by a 15th century monk who claimed to foresee the boundary between life and death thinning once each year, on All Hallows' Eve. The professor's gloved hand hovered over the book, but did not touch it. He said the translation was imperfect, but one line appeared again and again. On the night when shadow mirrors flesh, the dead walk where their likenesses dwell. The words hung in the air like frost. Mack raised an eyebrow, part skepticism, part interest. Mick simply studied Korda, knowing the tremor in the man's hand and the flicker of candlelight that made his face seem both ageless and haunted. Around them stood a small audience, curators, assistants, and the night guards who refused to leave after last night's scare. Frankie Fingers D'Angelo huddled near the doorway, gripping his flashlight as though it were a holy relic. Sam Slim Kowalski stood beside him, arms crossed, muttering about drafts and nonsense. When Korda spoke again, his voice dropped almost to a whisper. It's in the manuscript, warned of mimicry, that spirits could inhabit images of effigies made in their likeness. Statues, paintings, wax figures, anything fashioned by human hands. A few people chuckled nervously when the curator suggested the professor save his ghost stories for Halloween parties. Korda only smiled, a small knowing smile that did nothing to ease the chill in the room. He said he intended to demonstrate the manuscript's power properly. A séance held that very evening, beneath the gaze of the museum's new exhibit. Wax and wonder, icons of the past. Slim groaned quietly. Frankie whimpered audibly. Mack leaned toward Mick. You thinking what I'm thinking? Mick nodded. But this museum is about to get livelier than it's been in a century. Korda closed the manuscript with a slow, deliberate motion. The candle flames wavered. No one noticed that a single page had slipped loose, fluttering to the floor as though moved by breath. Frankie noticed first. He bent to pick it up, only to find the parchment warm to the touch. He stared at it a moment too long, until Slim hissed, "Put it down before it bites you." Frankie obeyed. The professor reclaimed the page without a word and tucked it back inside. Then he looked up, eyes gleaming. All Hallows' Eve, he murmured, is tomorrow. And though no one said so aloud, everyone in the room felt the same unspoken thought. The dead might not be the only ones returning. Chapter 3. The Séance. Twilight fell early on Halloween. By the time Mick Mack returned to the museum, a wind was sweeping down University Avenue, scattering dry leaves against the steps like restless hands. Inside, the galleries glowed with low amber light. The air smelled faintly of wax, polish, and something older. Something had been waiting a very long time to be disturbed. Professor Arpad Korda had transformed the central hall into a chamber of spectacle. The long oak table from the manuscript room now stood in the middle of the new exhibition. Wax and wonder, icons of the past. Around it loomed figures in glass cases. Napoleon, Cleopatra, a Roman centurion, a monk in coarse robes. And at the far end, a rogues gallery of infamous faces. Vlad the Impaler, Elizabeth Bathory, Birkin Hare. The waxwork eyes caught the candlelight and seemed almost alive. Korda moved among them like a conductor taking his place before an orchestra. Guests whispered, museum staff, a few journalists, 2 uneasy detectives, and the reluctant night watchman pressed into service as witnesses. Frankie Fingers D'Angelo stood too close to Mac, clutching his flashlight as if he planned to use it as a crucifix. Sam, Slim Kowalski, lingered at the back, chewing on a toothpick and muttering that he should have called in sick. When Korda spoke, his voice carried through the hall with quiet command. He said tonight's demonstration was not a mockery of faith, but an exploration of memory. That the boundary between art and afterlife was thinner than science would admit. He gestured to the wax figures. Likenesses, he said softly, are invitations. Then he opened the manuscript. The parchment crackled. He began to read. The Latin words rolled from his tongue in slow, deliberate cadence. The rhythm seemed to vibrate through the floor, through the table, through the ribs of anyone listening. At first, nothing happened. Then one of the candles guttered. Another followed. The air thickened, and a faint tremor rippled across the terry. Frankie's knuckles whitened on the flashlight. Slim whispered, cheap tricks and drafty halls. Korda continued reading, the syllables growing sharper, older somehow, as though the language remembered itself. A glass at the far end of the table shuddered, then burst with a crisp, perfect crack. Frankie yelped and stumbled backward to Mac, who caught him with weary reflexes. Korda did not flinch. He finished the final line, snapped the book shut, and the trembling stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Slim exhaled. Well, he said dryly, if that's supposed to raise the dead, it's off to a slow start. Nervous laughter followed, thin and uneven. But in the hush that returned, Mick thought he heard something else. A faint rustle from one of the wax displays. He looked toward the glass case nearest the door. The figure of the monk inside stood perfectly still, hands folded in prayer. But the candle beside it had gone out. And when the detective glanced again at the professor, Korda's gaze was already fixed on the same figure, his expression unreadable. The séance was over. Whatever it had awakened was not. Chapter 4. When the Wax Walks. For a few minutes after the séance, the museum remained unnervingly still. Guests shuffled, muttered, tried to laugh off their nerves. The professor's calm presence, his slight smile, seemed to keep the room tethered to reason. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, a plunge. Total, suffocating darkness. Someone gasped. A chair scraped. In the confusion, a single candle toppled, rolled, and died. Frankie fingers D'Angelo's voice wobble through the black. I don't like this, Slim. I don't like this at all. Slim snapped back, automatically his voice somewhere between a hiss and a prayer. Stay put. Don't touch anything. Stop breathing so loud. Footsteps. Maybe 2 sets. Maybe more. A faint rustling sound. Cloth, not footsteps, moved past the table. For 10 endless seconds, no one dared move. Then, without warning, the lights blinked back on, and the room had changed. The wax figures stood exactly as before, except one. The vampire, once posed behind its velvet rope, had moved. Its head was turned slightly toward the guests, mouth parted just enough to show a flash of sculpted teeth. A smear of red glistened at the corner of its lips. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then a scream tore through the hall. A guard lay crumpled near the far wall, motionless. His flashlight rolled in a slow, lazy circle on the floor. Mick Mack reached him first. The man was alive, barely, his pulse thin, his skin pale as chalk. On his neck, 2 small puncture wounds. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else crossed themselves. Corda knelt beside the guard, expression grave, but oddly serene. The prophecy, he murmured, where their likenesses dwell. Mac shot him a look. You're not helping, Professor. Frankie backed himself into a corner, clutching his flashlight like a crucifix. They moved, he stammered. The statues moved. I told you, Slim. I told you they weren't right. Slim rubbed his temples. If you say it again, Fingers, I'm quitting. I mean it. I work in a bank, a bakery. I don't care. No wax, no curses. No use screaming in my ear at midnight. But even Slim didn't step closer to the vampire figure. Mick studied the blood on its lips. Dark, tacky, smelling faintly metallic. Real. He straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. The professor watched him with that same cool detachment. This is what happens, Corda said softly, when boundaries are breached. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the high windows. Every candle trembled in its glass. And as the museum's generator coughed once and went silent again, plunging the hall back into darkness, Frankie whispered the question that none of them wanted answered. If that thing just moved, what's to stop the rest of them? Chapter 5. Curses and Clues. By dawn, the Royal Ontario Museum looked less like a temple of knowledge, more like the aftermath of a fever dream. The exhibition hall was sealed off. The vampire figure stood behind police tape, its waxen smile untouched by the night's panic. McCathie and MacNeely sat in the manuscript room once more, an island of calm amid the commotion. A single lamp glowed over the long oak table, where the cursed manuscript now lay open like a patient on the operating table. The edges of the parchment were singed, faintly browned as though brushed by flame. Mick leaned closer. Looks like heat damage, he said quietly. There wasn't a fire last night. Mac rested his elbows on the table. Maybe it's self-combusting guilt, he said. If it bursts into flames, I'm leaving, manuscript or not. Mick didn't smile. He turned a page with the care of a surgeon. The script shimmered faintly in the lamplight, black ink with a metallic sheen, almost iridescent. Across the room, Dr. Isabel Carrington entered, lab coat over her dress, hair pinned hastily. She carried a case of small instruments and a certain look that meant she'd been up all night too. I've seen the guard, she said. He'll live. Severe shock, mild blood loss, but nothing supernatural. Punctures were made by something narrow and metal, not teeth. Mac looked relieved. So we're back to ordinary human lunacy. I can live with that. Izzy moved closer to the manuscript, adjusting her glasses. But there's something else, she added. The curator who catalogued this book collapsed this morning. Nausea, tremors, blurred vision. 2 of the porters who helped unpack it last week have the same symptoms. Mick glanced up. Think it's poison? Possibly, she said. Old inks often use compounds of mercury, arsenic, even lead. Centuries of handling, no gloves. The burns on the parchment edges could be a chemical reaction. Corrosion. Mack whistled softly. So the curse is just bad chemistry? Just, Izzy said, giving him a look. But that doesn't explain what happened last night. Poison doesn't move statues. Mick closed the manuscript gently. No, he said. Fear does strange things to people. Darkness, suggestion, a few well-timed noises. Someone wanted this place to believe in ghosts. He paused, studying the singed edge of the page. Still, it's odd, isn't it? Fire marks without flame, ink that glows like metal, and a professor who never once touched the book with his bare hands. Mack frowned. You think Concorda's playing conductor to this haunted orchestra? Maybe, Mick said. Or maybe he's just smart enough to keep his fingerprints off the notes. Izzy packed her instruments, her eyes lingering on the closed book. Whatever it is, she said, I'd advise you not to keep it in direct light. Don't breathe too close. Frankie's voice carried faintly from the hallway. Detectives? You might want to see this. They followed him to the gallery doors. The wax figures stood as before. Napoleon, Cleopatra, the rest, perfectly still, perfectly arranged. Except for one. The monk in coarse robes, the one from the séance, now faced the opposite direction. No footprints, no marks on the floor, just turned. Mack exhaled slowly. If that statue moves again, I'm leaving, manuscript or not. Mick said nothing. He simply watched the figure, half expecting it to blink. And for the first time that morning, he wasn't sure it wouldn't. Chapter 6. The Whispering Gallery. By mid-morning, the museum had traded its ghosts for drafts and police tape. The headlines were already printing themselves. Séance scandal at the ROM, and Professor Corda had retreated to his office, citing exhaustion and academic indignation. But Frankie Fingers D'Angelo wasn't ready to let the matter rest. He followed Mick Mack through the upper corridor, waving his flashlight like a pointer. I'm telling you, Frankie said, the voices came from up here. Not a radio, not an echo. Actual voices. They said my name, remember? Slim trailed behind, yawning into his coffee. Yeah, I remember. You've mentioned it roughly every 6 minutes since sunrise. The detectives stopped beneath the great dome of the main rotunda, the same chamber that had hosted the séance. The acoustics were strange even in daylight. Every sound seemed to hang in the air too long, stretching thin before it died. Mick tilted his head, listening. Say something, Frankie. Frankie straightened, self-conscious. Like what? Anything. Cleared his throat. Hello? A single word, whispered back a moment later. Clear, ghostly, and very far away. Slim blinked. All right, that's odd. Mick walked slowly around the perimeter, tracing the curvature of the wall with his fingertips. It's the architecture, he said. The dome carries sound along the gallery like a wire. Whisper in one corner and it travels clear to the opposite side. Mack tested it. He stood by a pillar and spoke under his breath. His words surfaced across the room as though carried on invisible thread. Frankie's eyes widened. So that's it. Somebody was up here, whispering during the séance, making everyone think the walls were talking. Slim shook his head, half admiring, half irritated. So Frankie wasn't crazy, just annoying. Frankie beamed. See? Vindicated. Mick smiled faintly. Vindicated might be generous, Frankie, but yes. Someone used the acoustics to throw their voice. Clever, too. You can spook a room if you know how sound travels. Mac knelt, studying scuff marks along the marble baseboard. Footprints, fresh. Same rubber soles as a guard's uniform. Someone used museum access to get up here without being seen. Slim frowned. So what was the point? Just a prank? Mick shook his head. Not a prank. A distraction. While everyone stared at the table downstairs, someone was up here using the dome to stir panic. Then in the dark, they moved the figure and attacked the guard. Frankie shivered. So, no ghosts? Max stood, brushing his hands. Not unless ghosts wear size 10 work boots. For a moment, the men listened to the silence stretching under the dome. It's almost peaceful now. Almost. Mick turned toward the stairwell's voices low. Still, it's funny. A hall built for history, now haunted by acoustics. And as they descended the stairs, the faintest whisper followed them down. Just air moving through stone. But it said Frankie's name, all the same. Chapter 7. Mass Off. By nightfall, the Royal Ontario Museum was once again sealed to the public. Rain tapped softly against the high windows, steady whisper in the glass. Inside the wax gallery being restored to its unsettling perfection. Every figure in place, every candle lit, every shadow ready to deceive. Detectives met McCathie and MacNeely stood at the long oak table waiting. They requested the lights be dimmed and the doors locked. The culprit wanted another performance. They were going to provide the stage. Mac eyed the empty chairs around the table. I can't believe we're doing this again. You sure about this plan? Mick gave a small nod. If he's clever enough to fake ghosts, he won't resist a sequel. This time, we control the lighting. Slim and Frankie hovered near the doorway, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Frankie held his flashlight close to his chest. Slim muttered, "If the statue starts square dancing, I'm gone." The last to arrive was Professor Arpad Korda. He entered quietly, his expression unreadable. Carried the manuscript in gloved hands, as if escorting a holy relic to its altar. I see we are to tempt fate a second time, he said. Call it an experiment, Mick replied. Korda took a seat, placed the manuscript on the table. The candles flickered, their flames reflecting faintly in the glass eyes of the surrounding wax figures. The air was heavy, as if waiting. Korda began to read. The Latin syllables curled through the room like smoke, soft, rhythmic, hypnotic. Mick Mack listened carefully, but their attention wasn't on the words. Mack's hand rested on the switch to the auxiliary lighting panel they'd set up earlier. Then it came, the faint creak from above, the same spot under the dome where sound carried. A whisper, low and deliberate, sliding through the air like a ghost. Mick signaled Mack. The light snapped off. Panic would have followed, but this time the darkness was planned. Mick's flashlight beam swept across the gallery, fast, deliberate. And there, frozen among the wax figures, stood a man in costume, cloak, fangs, powdered face. The vampire. Only this vampire was breathing. Hold it right there, Max said sharply. The man bolted, knocking over Candelabron as he ran. Wax faces flashed, in the flickering light as if turning to watch. Slim tackled him near the exit, cursing as both went down a tangle of velvet and panic. Frankie shouted something incoherent about garlic. When the lights steadied again, Mick pulled back the false fangs and revealed the face of Dr. Howard Merton, a rival scholar from McGill, notorious for feuding with Corda over provenance disputes. Merton glanced up at them, chest heaving. "You don't understand," he spat. "That manuscript doesn't belong here. It's mine by discovery." "Discovery," Mac said. "You mean burglary with atmosphere." Corda stepped forward, expression readable. "You would desecrate a sacred relic for vanity?" "Sacred?" Merton sneered. "It's a fraud. Patchwork medieval nonsense stitched together to scare fools like you." Corda's eyes narrowed. "Why steal it?" Mick started to intervene, but before he could, Corda reached for the book. His gloved hand brushed the cover, and a sudden hiss filled the air. The manuscript began to smoke. Everyone froze. Thin tendrils of gray curled upward, followed by a glow, soft at first, then fierce. The parchment ignited in Corda's hands, the flames blooming soundlessly as if lit from within. No wires, no chemicals, no trick. The professor did not flinch. He simply watched it burn, face illuminated in orange light, calm as a man watching a candle die. Mick moved toward him. "Professor, drop it!" Corda only smiled faintly. "Some knowledge," he said, "burns itself away when men try to claim it." The flames guttered suddenly, leaving nothing but ash and the faint scent of something metallic, like mercury and rain. No one spoke. Mac exhaled. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess that settles the question of who's taking it home tonight." Corda looked down at the ashes. "No one ever takes it home," he murmured. "It always goes back where it came from." And for the first time since they met him, Mick wasn't sure the professor was speaking about the book, or something far older. Chapter 8. Epilogue. Tricks, Treats, and Shadows. By dawn, the storm had passed. The Royal Ontario Museum stood silent again, its marble halls washed clean by the night rain, its waxen residents staring back into the emptiness of morning. Detectives Mick McCathie and MacNeely watched as Dr. Howard Merton, still in his half-burned costume, was escorted out by uniformed officers. He looked less like a vampire now, more like a man who'd spent too long chasing ghosts of his own ambition. Professor Arpad Corda remained in the manuscript room, seated before the oak table where only a scattering of ash remained. The fire burned swiftly and completely, leaving no residue in the wood, not a single mark. He gazed at the ashes as though reading them, his face calm, even faintly satisfied. "Some knowledge burns itself away when it is revealed," he said quietly. "It spares us from our own curiosity." No one argued. Mac cleared his throat, glancing at Mick. "I'll tell you one thing. If that was a curse, it's the most considerate one I've seen. Clean burned, minimal paperwork." Frankie Fingers D'Angelo stood nearby, looking pale but upright. "That's it," he said. "I'm done. No more Halloween shifts, no more séances, no more spooky museums. I'm taking vacation next October, maybe somewhere bright, sunny, with no statues." Slim sighed with exaggerated relief. "Good. Maybe I'll finally get some peace." Frankie nodded solemnly. "You'll miss me." Slim didn't answer, which was as good as a confession. The detectives made one final circuit of the gallery. The wax figures were still again, every expression frozen in perfect imitation of life. Something about them felt changed. Some small awareness, perhaps, of having been seen in the dark. Mac paused beside the vampire exhibit, now resealed behind its glass. I don't know about curses, he said, but I know one thing. Toronto's wax museum's never been this lively. Mick looked up toward the high dome, where the first thin light of morning filtered through. A faint trail of smoke, just a whisper of it, still curled above the spot where the manuscript had burned. Or this haunted, he said softly. Outside, the city yawned awake, unaware that for one long Halloween night, the line between art and afterlife had wavered. And for a moment, maybe, the dead really had walked where their likenesses dwell. The end. You've been listening to Ontario Cold Cases, Who Done It Wednesday. Tonight's story, Whispers in the Dark, reminds us that every museum holds more than artifacts and history. Some rooms echo with the sounds of the past. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, the past seems to listen back. The case of the cursed manuscript was officially closed as an act of theft and fraud. But no one ever explained how the parchment caught fire without a spark. When the Royal Ontario Museum reopened a week later, the vampire exhibit drew larger crowds than ever. Even though the curators swore they never put that faint red stain back on its lips. As for Frankie Fingers D'Angelo, kept his promise. No more Halloween shifts, no more voices in the dark, or so he said. This has been Ontario Cold Cases. I'm Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations. Thanks for listening, and remember, every story leaves behind an echo. The question is, who's still whispering back? Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. Available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe to Ontario Cold Cases today so you never miss an episode. Please share your thoughts and questions in the comments.